another episode of Belize Kolcha. I'm your host, Cindy Trapp. For those of you joining us for the first time, Belize Kolcha is an innovative new show for youths created by the National Institute of Culture and History that aims to share a little bit of the art, the culture, and the history of Belize with you. Today's episode is all about hurricanes, what they are, how they are formed, and the lasting impact a big one like Hattie can have on a country. Stay tuned because when we come back, eyewitnesses will give their accounts of the night in 1961 when Hurricane Hattie destroyed Belize and all but washed away Stann Creek Town.
Every June to November is hurricane season in Belize. That's 6 months out of every year during which Belize and all the other countries in the North Atlantic Ocean and Northeast Pacific east of the dateline prepare for the possible arrival of a tropical cyclone. Tropical cyclones that occur in the Northwest Pacific Ocean west of the dateline are called typhoons. So now that we know hurricanes are tropical cyclones of the North Atlantic Ocean, how do we identify which is which? By their names, of course. Let's find out how much you know about the naming process.
I'm here at the Cuzzin Community College to find out what students know about hurricanes. Hi, what's your name?
Patrick Swayze.
Okay, today we'll be testing your knowledge based on hurricanes. Your first question is, when did they start to name the hurricanes and who decides how to name them?
I don't really know when they start to name the hurricanes, but I think they start naming it because and those one go and name feet and when they know which one they come out and thing.
Okay, do you think that they started naming hurricanes based on female names or male names?
I would believe it started to base it on male names because back in the days, male used to be dominant than females.
Between 1950 and 1952, hurricanes were identified by the phonetic alphabet used by the aviation industry: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, etc. But in 1953, the U.S. Weather Bureau switched to women's names. The rest of the world eventually caught on, and naming rights now go by the World Meteorological Organization. In 1979, it was decided that men's names should be included too. 6 different name lists now alternate each year. If a hurricane does significant damage, its name is retired and replaced with another.
A hurricane usually lasts over a week. It moves about 10 to 20 miles per hour over the open ocean, gathering heat and energy over the warm waters. Evaporation from the sea usually strengthens it.
In the northern hemisphere, hurricanes spin in a counterclockwise direction around an area of low pressure which we call an eye. This is usually the calmest part of the storm. The spinning is due to the Coriolis force caused by the Earth's rotation.
Some hurricanes can be up to 600 miles wide, which is about the distance between Belize City and San Jose, Costa Rica, or to Havana, Cuba. And they can generate winds with speeds of more than 200 miles an hour, which is really fast. But wind speed isn't only used to determine the direction a hurricane is traveling in, it is also the factor used by forecasters to classify hurricanes in the Stafford-Simpson hurricane wind scale.
Category 1 describes storms with winds between 74 to 95 miles per hour. These are very dangerous winds and will produce some damage. Category 2 is for storms with winds between 96 to 110 miles per hour. These winds are extremely dangerous and will cause extensive damage. Category 3, wind speeds between 111 to 130 miles per hour. Without a doubt, devastating damage will occur. Category 4 accounts for hurricanes with wind speeds between 131 to 155 miles per hour. This category indicates damage on a catastrophic scale will occur. Category 5 is the last category on the scale and is the description for anything greater than 155 miles per hour. Facing a Category 5 hurricane means sure devastation and damages of catastrophic proportions.
Hurricane Hattie had reported winds of more than 200 miles an hour, but the Stafford-Simpson scale was not in effect back then, so it was just called a big one, a really big one. And in 1961, that big one was headed straight for Belize. Stay tuned, more Belize Kolcha coming up after the break.
In 1961, Belize had no internet and no television. Cable and wireless had only just introduced the country's first telephone system in 1956, but in 1961, private homes still did not have telephones. The chief means of communication in Belize at the time of Hattie were telegrams or radio bulletins. So the very first time most Belizeans heard about Hurricane Hattie was on the radio the evening of Friday, October 27, 1961, when the British Broadcasting System reported an advisory from the Miami Weather Bureau in its 7 o'clock news bulletin. Dr. Kenrick Leslie, Belize's first meteorologist, was 23 years old at the time and based at the Piorco Airport in Port of Spain, Trinidad. He tells us a little bit about what forecasting was like back then.
The hurricane season in those days didn't go to November. It ended on the 31st of October. Miami was not the National Hurricane Center. For the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean, it was Puerto Rico. So from the 1st of June to the 31st of October, the planes from Puerto Rico or from Trinidad, the American had bases in those areas, would fly from the Eastern Caribbean to the west coast of Africa and come back in a day, so they can see if any circulation was developing. The planes had radars, so with that they were able to see if something was happening from the cloud patterns.
Based on the available data, Hattie wasn't supposed to hit Belize.
Because we felt it was going to continue moving northward and to be picked up by what we call an upper air trough and swing it across Cuba, across the Bahamas, and out into the Atlantic.
But meteorology is at best an inexact science, and things didn't go as forecasted. On Sunday, October 29th, the trough moved slower than expected, and the northbound Hattie ended up on the wrong side, which meant instead of being propelled upwards and out into the Atlantic, it ended up on the western side of the trough, where the winds blow from north to south. This forced Hattie to make an almost 90-degree turn toward British Honduras, growing in strength as it did so. The next morning, Monday, October 30th, dawned sunny with clear skies in Belize City, giving citizens no warning of the monster headed its way. One such citizen was 13-year-old Edelia Burgos, a student of St. Ignatius School in Belize City at the time.
About 11 o'clock, the principal, the nun, she came and she told our teacher to send everybody home because everybody has to go home because there was a hurricane that was coming. We didn't really know what was a hurricane, and I just thought, well, it was some big breeze and big rain, that a storm was coming like that. And the thing is that we were surprised because we look at the sky, the sun was out, it was normal, there was nothing, it wasn't raining or anything that day. So we packed up our books and everybody went home. When I got home, I told my mother, she said, what happened? And she said, I said, they sent home everybody from school because they said that the hurricane is coming. And she said, yes, that's what the neighbors are saying, that the hurricane is coming. But my mother was washing and she just continued her washing that day, and she didn't make any fuss about like what we do now when a hurricane is coming. You send to buy up all the groceries and things. My mother didn't make any fuss about that. She didn't say, well, we have to get this or we have to get that or nothing.
Catholic Bishop Derek Wright was a 15-year-old St. John's College student living with his parents, 2 sisters, and a brother in the Lake Independence area of Belize City. Back in 1961, it was called Prisoner Creek.
My mother was at home, my father was a tailor, and I think he spent most of his time securing his tailor shop. When he came home that night, well, we were under the impression that the hurricane would come the next morning. So we thought we'd sleep at home and then We'd wake up early the next morning and go to a shelter.
27-year-old Hector Silva was the mayor of San Ignacio Town and also the representative for Kaya North. He was in the city on October 30th because the seat of government at that time was located in Belize City.
At 4:15, while we stood near to the Supreme Court, a radio Belize personnel, Mr. Eustace Osha, passed and he said, Hattie is coming to Belize. And the radio announced it, and it was one of the fastest preparations ever seen by people boarding their homes, because we had hours to contend with that monster that had developed winds of 200 miles an hour, above category 5. So Hattie came moving towards Belize. Those that could have fled, fled, and those that stayed had to find how they were going to save themselves and their families. Not all were fortunate.
38-year-old Cora Joseph was a registered nurse in Belize City when Hurricane Hattie struck.
I was sent to the Seaview Hospital to organize a hospital and to prepare for a hurricane. We weren't aware it would have been such a severe hurricane. Anyway, we took precautions. We put away the government records, which was the first thing we did. It took care of the records, the government, and we organized the attendance. Since I was the only nurse there, and all were surrounded by attendants.
In Stann Creek Town, news of the approaching hurricane did not reach the family of 16-year-old Rosalind Lewis on St. Vincent Street until the night of the 30th.
During that time, not many people have radios in their houses, right? My father had a radio, and during those times, the radios were operated by like the car batteries, and he had a radio in the shop, and almost every evening, some men in the neighborhood would come there to listen to news. They used to call it world news. And it was that same evening, while they were listening, they heard, that news came from Miami. And they heard the announcer that a hurricane is out and that it was coming to this country. That time it was called British Honduras. Around that time, it must have been about 9 o'clock. Usually my father closed the shop at 9. But then because of this news, they stayed until about after 10. And then so when the breeze started to blow around that time. So my father closed shop, the men, they went home, and my father went upstairs and he told my mother, get those children ready, let's go downstairs to the shop because the hurricane will hit. And we were already in our bed sleeping, so my mother wake us up and we all scrambled down the steps into the shop. And then, so we stayed there, my father still have on the radio. No, we were so frightened. I told my mother, well, what will we do? Will we go somewhere? I said, no, we are going to stay right here in our house. If you're going to die, we'll die right here. We started to cry, and because around that time, a few people, I see them leaving, going with their bundles. During the time before then, they used to say, hurricane, and it's not really hurricane, just strong breeze, and that's it.
At 11:15, the radio stations went dead. No more announcement. I was on my way coming to San Ignacio because they predicted that the waves, the tide was going to go about 20 feet above sea level. And I did not take chance, and I came back to my constituency, my municipality, to see what was going to be done, what was going to happen here.
We'll be right back. Shortly after midnight, the eye of Hurricane Hattie struck the coast of British Honduras between Belize City and Stann Creek Town. With winds reportedly in excess of 175 miles per hour, torrential rainfall, and a 15-foot storm surge, Hattie was indeed a monster to be reckoned with.
The night of October 30th was young Adelia's turn to sleep with her elderly grandmother at her two-story wooden house off Turton Alley in Belize City.
I awoke because my grandmother was shouting for me to get up, to wake up because it seemed like the hurricane is here now. She had a door that leads to the back and another door that leads on to the street. So both doors were already all open up. I don't know, the breeze had opened them up and everything was just flying right through the door.
It was frightening, the house was shaking. We went outside to go to a little house in the back, we couldn't make it, we came back upstairs. House was already twisted, we couldn't close the door.
The howling wind woke up 19-year-old Santiago Sosa, who had fallen asleep at his boss's new home on southern foreshore, where he had gone to help close up in preparation for the hurricane.
And then we opened the back window. When we opened the back window and we looked out, houses that we knew were back there were not there again. And then we see some tree were bent like one bow. Nothing like water was out here. Out here was dry land for as far as your eye could see. This was about around 4 o'clock. After a little while, we feel one lull. Not too long. And I was told that that's the eye of the hurricane. And then when he come back now, he come back with the water. And that was when we had some major destruction. So where I was, the house that I was in, the Anglican bishop house was right beside it. That was made out of wood. And I saw that water dismantle the house piece by piece by piece until the house disappeared and everybody that was in there taking refuge died. I saw them people drown. Downstairs we were getting hit. Boom, boom. The next morning we found out a big barge was hitting the beams underneath. Out here by the tourism village, there was a tank, one big water tank made out of iron, big iron, heavy. It take one big crane to lift that up. The water pick up that thing and slam it against Scotch skirt and kill everybody inside.
When their house started rocking, Adelia and her grandmother, assisted by a neighbor, braved flying zinc to seek refuge in the downstairs flat. But that idea was short-lived when water from the arriving tidal waves started to flood the downstairs fast.
By the time I stood up, the water was like at my knees already, and I said, and Mr. Hilberta said, we have to get out of this house. The water is coming now, let's go. And he said, well, now we will have to use the rope. And so we said, well, where will we go? Going back upstairs? He said, no, the upstairs must be that must be done low down or something. And he said, there was a lady who had just built a big house right in front of my grandmother. She had just come back from the States and she built this big house. But tied the rope, he will be in front. He tied it around him and around his wife, and each of them hold one of the children. And then he tied it around me and he told my grandmother that she will stay at the back and hold the end of the rope. Mr. Hilberta managed to open his door. Because of the water, we were having problems to get the door open to get out. We saw a lot of people that were just trying to get through the alley to get to the same house, and everybody just shouting for my grandmother to come, let's go over there, we have to get over there quick because the water is coming up, let's go. By the time we crossed the street, get by the step, the water was like already past my waist, and I managed to get up the step, and Mr. Hilberta and his wife and 2 children and all of us got in, and I thought my grandmother was in the house also.
But Adelia's grandmother was not in the house, and it took a great deal of begging before those inside even consented for the door to be reopened while the hurricane raged outside. After what seemed like hours, the neighbor returned with her.
But she was all soaking wet. Everything was wet up for her, her hair, everything. She looked like she was ready to drop down or whatever. And she said that she was trying to tell us that by the time she got on by the step, The rope just slipped out of her hand, the water just probably made it, and all she could have done was grab around one of the posts by the railing, and she hold on to that post and she never let it go, because that's where Mr. Hilberto found her, completely submerged in the water, only her head was out.
The Lewis family in Stann Creek faced disaster after disaster that night. They left their family home to seek shelter at a neighbor's house built 8 feet off the ground, only to find it, and them with it, crashing to the ground when the waters started rising.
It started to float. It's floating around with us, floating around with us. Then we saw the water came up. As far as from the ground, we see it coming up to the windowsill. My neighbor said, you know what? We are going to leave this house, the water is rising. And the way how it is floating, it may go to the creek. Havana Creek is right there, like 20-something yards away, 25 or so yards away from us. So my father said, no, we're not going to leave. We're going to stay right here, it will go down, and then we can go back to our house. And all of a sudden, with the wind and the rain and all that, we saw our house from there going through and fro like it's dancing, through and fro. And when our house crashed over to the street, because we were on the street, and we see all the groceries, the food stuff and everything from the shop floating away. And our house, we saw the things going. Oh my God, it was unbelievable. I say, our whole house gone. Where will we stay after this hurricane? And for the first time, I saw my father shed tears. He looked at us, he said, God will help us. And every time it lightened, we look on the other side, most houses had gone down. And so my neighbor said, well, we have to come out from here now, because you see that creek, this house is going to the creek. It will break up there and we will all die. So my father said, where will we go? So, well, Mr. Lewis, I don't know, we'll have to come out from here. And he grabbed one of my sisters. He said he will help with her. And before we say yes, no, he gone already through the window. So only my father, my mother, and my other 3 sisters and myself. So my father said, well, we'll have to come out. So we came out. I couldn't believe I could swim in such depth of water. It was high already. It was like 8 feet. Yes, it was like 8 feet. So we swam, and my father kept calling us in like it was a roll call. He kept calling everybody's name. Greta, yes, pa. Rose, yes, pa. Somebody said, Mara, yes, pa. And he kept calling us. Answer as I call, because I want to know that we are together. And keep together, that's all he keeps saying. So we swim, and there was a housetop.
Rosalind and her family clung to that rooftop, enduring stinging rain and ferocious winds as they tried to dodge flying posts and zinc, until the building broke up under them and they found themselves back in the water.
This time you see the debris in the ground, in the water, you see the waves like we were in the sea. And so on, we were in there between the debris, we had to swim. And we don't know where we are going, we just swim like that, And there was a lightning when somebody saw us. He was in a house. He saw us and he told the people, some people in the water.
The Lewises were rescued from the water and found themselves in a house full of loud, angry, frightened people. As the hurricane raged, it was only a matter of time before that house broke up too, spilling the Lewis family back into the raging waters around Stann Creek Town.
We swam for hours. We swam because we found ourselves like 1, 2, 3 streets way back. We swam until when we saw the debris. It was such a miracle. The debris came together. And we were right there, but the water is below us. And we were afraid to move. The least move, maybe we could go down. So then my father would tell us, stay there, and all our clothes torn out. I was without clothes. Whatever clothes I had on, that was torn. And that time, rain, the needle rain, I call it, the needle drops striking into our backs. And then all the people around, you see animals passing you. Not only the dogs and the pigs and the snakes and all that. Yeah, but nobody was afraid, and the snakes don't look to harm anybody. I think even them want to save their lives. And after a while, a few hours after, the water was receding underneath us. Whenever we went conscious of it, the water recedes. And with all that time striking rain, we thought it would never end.
Less than 24 hours after her arrival, Hattie was gone, leaving in her wake more than 300 dead, thousands homeless, and a broken nation.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The furor of Hurricane Hattie leaves very little standing in its wake in the capital city of Belize in British Honduras. 100 persons died. 75% of the homes are destroyed or damaged by the 200-mile-an-hour gusts. Tidal waves were 20 feet high. Pre-hurricane warnings from Miami are credited with keeping casualties low. Piles of rubble are all that remain where once there stood a city.
And then afterwards you open the door, and there the water was at the very height of the last step to the veranda, which is 15 feet. That was how high the water.
I took a couple of hours before the water gone down. It was almost around by noon before the water gone down, where you could have walk down the street. I still had water up high. I couldn't tell whether I was on Regent Street or Albert Street or anywhere. I couldn't tell where I was. Houses, everything there, one on top of the other. One on top of the other. Mass destruction.
The house was blown down. I was saved in a tree. I climbed in a tree and I held on. Seems like hours. I heard my father shouting and asking about the rest of the family. And I told him, I know about everybody, but I know for sure I saw my mother go under. So I knew for a fact that she had drowned. It's only afterwards that, after it was all settled, and I realized everybody else had gone, except him and myself.
So there was a lady, they still have a bundle of clothes. My father had already taken off his shirt and throw it on me. And then a lady with the bundle of clothes. So she took out a shirt, a dress to give me. And I wore that dress for days. There was nothing. There was nothing that you would wear. Everything had gone. So I was so grateful to that lady when she gave me that dress.
Everybody wanted food, and so those few first days, everybody went out to go and see what they could get from the different stores or whatever. People were breaking into stores like Brody's and Rollmax and Hofios or any store that had groceries and things. People were breaking into them and things like that and getting things. And we survived. I think one of my brothers had brought home like a case of spaghetti and meatballs or something, and we lived on that for days, eating just cold spaghetti and meatballs.
It was only a matter of time before the looting became violent, and help had to be called in to assist the local police.
Well, the British government immediately began to give us aid, financially, manpower with their British army, to go and begin to clear the land, along with our public works, our forestry department, and the British were very, very, very much present for the occasion.
Aid came from all around the world, from England, the United States, Mexico, as well as other neighboring countries, to alleviate immediate concerns and to assist with rebuilding efforts.
And immediately they began to set shelter for these people, whatever building there was. And there was an immediate move to move most of those people up to Hattieville.
Hattieville, Silkgrass, and Georgetown were communities that sprang up to temporarily house those who were displaced by Hattie. But many residents once established never moved back, making a home for their descendants in these now permanent communities within Belize.
And then came the decision to build a new capital for the purpose of transferring the seat of government from Belize City to higher grounds, Belmopan. So that was decided and in cabinet, and so the move began to plan where next. There were many offers, Mullins Street, but different places to go, but that site being in the center of the country was selected as the site for the new capital city. And so the beginning of that transition from Belize City to Belmopan. Then the other things came, what next? What will the population do without jobs? The United States opened its doors and hundreds of Belizeans went to the United States, and they are still there. Now, 50 years passed, and the majority of Belizeans right now were born within that period. Do they know what we are talking about? No. Do they take it serious when a storm is? I don't think so.
The closest Belize has come to a major hurricane since Hattie was Mitch in 1998, which was a Category 5, but fortunately, we were spared the brunt of its impact. Other recent hurricanes have caused extensive damages to Belize in the millions, but none were accompanied by a tidal wave the size that Hurricane Hattie survivors remember so vividly. Could what Don Hector said be true? Do Belizeans really understand how devastating a hurricane can be? Or are we not taking hurricane warnings seriously? Stay tuned, because after the break, we'll find out. The government of Belize takes hurricanes very seriously. In fact, two government agencies, the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, and the National Meteorological Service have the duty of informing and preparing the country in the event that any weather system appears to threaten us.
Regular tropical weather updates are prepared by myself or one of the forecasters, and we pass those on to the National Emergency Coordinator at NEMO. And if a system is developing, then we coordinate with the National Emergency Coordinator, and we decide whether the system is posing a threat and whether we start to get NEMO operational, get operational committees in tune and warn that, well, maybe this thing might head this way. We might have to meet to decide what plans we will do in dealing with this system if it heads our way. There are 4 phases in the National Emergency Management Plan. The first phase is declared when the system is about 72 hours away. And at that time, a single red flag is hoisted. And as the system gets nearer and is about 48 hours away, then the second phase is declared. And that second phase is when we hoist the one red flag with the black dot in the center. And as the system gets closer to within about 24 hours from making landfall, then the third phase of the National Emergency Plan is declared. And that is when the flags are flown, the ones with 2 flags, each with one black dot on them. And as the system moves away, makes landfall, does what it has to do and moves away, and is no longer a threat to us, then the all clear phase is declared, and that is depicted by a lone green flag.
There are also numbers of hurricane preparedness guidelines available on the NEMA website for you to download. In the meantime, let's look in on our friends Miss Vera and cousin Catto and see how prepared they are in the event of a hurricane.
The hurricane was moving towards the west-northwest at 8 miles per hour and is expected to continue on this track for the next 20.
Oh lad, Hurricane Nicole, now I want to do, goodness gracious. Oh lad, and even have nothing stuck up, and even, oh goodness Catto, you come just in time, come. Oh.
Vera, one lot of people run about out there like chicken without a head. That will happen.
Boy, you know hear the news just now? Hurricane Nicole.
Sure, that done time for that again. What you cook? I hungry bad.
You know just hear what I say? I just tell you Hurricane Nicole and ask you the thing about your belly.
But hurricane not hit Belize long time. Where everybody the first up for?
Where were you in a Catto? When hurricane season the on, anything could happen. Hurricane could hit anytime between June and November. Hey Catto, I don't worry bad. The weatherman just said the hurricane now a category 3 and we in a phase 1.
Then where the worry for? You got a whole month to prepare?
Where you gonna school for? 36 hours means tomorrow night. Everybody know hurricane will hit October that the worstest kind.
What make October hurricane different from the rest?
They say the hurricane they like hot water cause that make them stronger. And I don't know if you noticed, but every time we turn on the faucet nowadays, the water run hot.
That's true, Vera. I nearly burned up myself the other day when I got to take one cold shower.
I'm real nervous, Catto. Hurricane Hattie may hit Belize in our October too. October 31st, 1961.
You mean the wrong name time there, Vera? That like dinosaur ages?
Boy, what's wrong with you? You not listen to me? No, there's no time for sit on boat and chat. We only have 1 day or so to buy up our provisions and put our important things up. And get the shutters pan the window there.
What you mean we? Why you look at me like that for?
Because you will help me, cousin Catto. First thing we have to do is go to shop. Make I go change first.
So we're cooking for out there now, Vera?
I can't forget one flashlight. One of them heavy duty one, and we need lots of battery. Miss, make us see that flashlight there. We need battery for that, and we need battery for the radio so we could listen to the news. And remind me to make us send you that phone here to get the kerosene for the kerosene lamp in case if electricity go. You only make up your face, help me look through the eyes. Alright, cousin Catto. I need 16 of Vienna sausage, 16 of sardines, go get the quartz to me 1 gallon, hurry. We need this to sterilize the water and wash out the house food when things pass.
Wait, Vera. You to buy up things, lot of things like the Christmas. The way all up on the list is so.
Listen, Catto. Hurricane carried on food, electricity, clothes, everything else. And they left behind all the nasty, dirty, muddy water. We have to have enough supplies for a week.
In the case there, we need an extra 2 tins of sausage.
Come on. Hi.
What we doing here, Vera? Come buy medicine too?
We have to prepare for anything. The Red Cross people then say we have to have an emergency kit. What if you go cut your foot and bleed now? No China want opening there, so whether we make a band-aid?
Hurricane know a lot of things too.
We interrupt this program to bring you an urgent update on approaching hurricane. Now a Category 5 hurricane. At 12 a.m., the center of now Category 5 Hurricane Mitch is located near latitude 12.3 north and longitude at 252 miles east-southeast of Belize City. Hurricane has maximum sustained winds of 165 miles per hour. This makes Hurricane Mitch a powerful and deadly hurricane. The government of Belize has declared the Phase 2 of the National Emergency Plan.
Catto!
Now where want Vera?
You don't nail up there window?
If I move any faster, I'm a drop.
We have to hurry, Catto. The hurricane now on Category 5 now. And it comes straight here. Hurry up. I still need you to help me wash out them bucket and fill it up with clean water.
I tired now, Vera.
Oh, you tired now? You better hurry up with them window. You hear that? It's a good thing when I put up them shutters in time.
Vera, me afraid.
Hush, man. Make her go in the room go check for the window, see if any water they blow in.
Vera, I'm blind.
Why stop your foot? You not got the flashlight right beside you?
Oh yeah.
That was me take off this light by accident. Take off the flashlight for me now. I don't want you to waste all my battery in case if we need it for true. Calm your nerves, Catto. Get one Johnny Key. Eat one Johnny Key. We are alright. We are alright, Papa. We just have to go and be praying.
Welcome to Belize It or Not, the part of the show where we test to see how well you know your country. This week's winner receives a family pass to any archaeological site within Belize. Now for today's question. Are you ready? Hurricane Hattie had 3 storm names. It first appeared in the Atlantic, and then it crossed over to the Pacific where it was renamed, and then it re-emerged back into the Atlantic for a 3rd name. If you know the 3 names that Hurricane Hattie had, send us a text at 1010-200 and win.
Well guys, that's our show for today. But before I go, please remember the next time a hurricane threatens Belize that 90% of the casualties come from drowning. So it is important that all persons evacuate keys, beaches, and all locations that might be swept by high tides or storm waves. To learn more about Hurricane Hattie, please visit the ongoing exhibition at the Museum of Belize. My name is Cindy Trapp, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Belize Kolcha. Bye!